Welcome to our new unit. So unit 3 is quadratics. And so we're going to start by solving quadratics by factoring. Factoring is something you learned in Algebra 1. And so now we're going to use it to solve. And so we're going to start up here. When you factor something like this, where the a value is 1, it's the easiest type of factoring. We're looking for what multiplies to be this last number and adds to be this middle number. And so we know that for x squared, it's going to be x times x. So we can go straight into our parentheses there. X and x gives me this x squared. For our other number here, again, multiplies to be this and adds to be this. If you don't know your number sense very good, you're going to have to set it up and think about everything here. So 1 and 6, 2 and 3, and one of them has to be negative because this is negative. So in this case, that would mean 1 and 6, because that's the one that has a difference of 5. One of them has to be negative, but our middle here is going to add to be a positive, so I know the bigger number has to be positive, so the smaller number has to be negative. So that would be -1 and +6. Just think back when you had these parentheses, you would have to FOIL, and so you would get x times x, which is x squared, and then you would multiply the outside and the inside term like this. And so this gives you -1x, and then this gives you +6x, and when we combine that, that's where we get that 5x. So those are the easiest ones to factor, the one where the a value is 1. So I'm going to jump on over here before we move to our other factors and just remind you how to factor when the a value is not. Sorry, this doesn't even work here. Okay. Don't know what I was thinking there. So we want to factor this where the a value is not 1. So this is the one that's a little bit harder and you have to use one of your methods. A lot of the Algebra 1 teachers start with the box, so I'll review that. With the box, that's the one that you take your box here and you set your first term in the first box and your last term in the last box. You multiply these together and you get 10x squared. And so you're looking for what multiplies to be 10x squared and adds to be 7x. And so we can break that down 1 and 10, 2 and 5. Those are the things that multiply together to get me 10. We want that one that adds to be 7, and so that would be these two. So I put 2x and 5x. Doesn't matter which order you put that in, it's still going to give you the same answer. Now we find our greatest common factor in this first row. And so our greatest common factor in this first row would be 2x. And we are going to undo our box. So 2x times x gives me that 2x squared. 2x times 1 gives me this 2x. Then x times 5 gives me this 5x. And 1 times 5 gives us this 5. Here are my two factors. And so this would be x plus 1 times 2x plus 5. I'm going to go ahead now and move on to a couple other methods, just in case your Algebra 1 teacher taught you a different method. One is called rooftop. And so you make a rooftop here, you multiply those together, that gives you 10x squared. That's usually the first step in any one of the methods. So we go ahead and start with that. And then we build a rooftop here. And with this case, we put 2x into both of those parentheses. Then what goes here is what would multiply to give me 10x squared and add to be 7x. And we already said that was 2x and 5x. So I'm going to put my 2 and my 5 right there. In this case, both of those are positive. Now with the rooftop method, you do have to check the parentheses and see, is there a greatest common factor that snuck in there? And so 2 goes into both of these. So I take that out because that is not a true number. And so there is what we're left with. And so x plus 1 and 2x plus 5, which is exactly what we had here. All right, the last method I'll go over, slide and divide. With slide and divide, again, the first step is always to multiply these. So I'm going to slide that there to the end, and I get x squared plus 7x plus 10. Then we factor just like the one on the other page. We know that x times x gives us x squared. We're looking for what multiplies to be 10 and adds to be 7, and so that is 5 and 2. Now, we slid this 2 over here, so we need to divide by 2. If it does not divide evenly, then it becomes your coefficient. And so we get 2x plus 5. If it divides evenly, then you're left with x plus 1 there. I like this method because you do have the solutions right here. So just when it says solve, that happens to be right here. Those are our two solutions. If it says factor, you would want to take it to this step here. But there are other methods out there. There's the CAB, there's the X, tons of different methods. You pick whichever one you prefer. Now, keep in mind, you should be keeping the one that you prefer and know how to do. A lot of students will say, that's my favorite method, but really not know how to do it. So you don't want to stick to that one. Find one that you know how to do and go with that one. All right, so we're going to switch to solving here. And so when we solve, we set it equal to 0. That should always be your first step. So if this was on the other side, you want to take everything to one side so that it is set equal to 0. We will count you off if you don't do that, so make sure that you get it set equal to 0. All right, for this case here, we want to factor. So I'm going to go ahead and do slide and divide, and so I get x squared minus 17x plus 30 is equal to 0. I slid that 5 over to the end. Now we're ready to factor. And so we do it just like when a is 1, because a is 1 here, and so that's going to be x and x. And so now we're ready to find the two things that multiply together to give me 30 and add to be negative 17. And so that is negative 15 and negative 2. Now we slid that 5 to the end, so we need to divide by 5. Again, if it divides evenly, then you're going to leave it just like that. And so 15 over 5 is x minus 3. If it does not divide evenly, then that becomes your coefficient. And so 5x minus 2. Now, the good part that I told you about slide and divide is that when we factor, it's always x minus your first root, x minus your second root. So I actually already know that my solutions are 3 and 2/5. I am going to go through the rest of the steps just in case you're not doing slide and divide. You need to know how to solve. And so the reason why we set this equal to 0 is because when you multiply two things together, one or both of them have to be 0 in order to give you 0. So we set each one of these equal to 0. And so then we add 3 and we get x equals 3, which is what we knew we were going to get. And then in this case, we add the 2 and then divide by 5, which is 2/5, which is exactly what we knew because I told you with slide and divide, it ends up being our solutions right here. So it's a good place to see. That's the reason why this becomes the coefficient here to get that 5x minus 2 when we factor, is because when we solve, we add the 2 and then we divide by 5. That's how that 5 got down in the denominator in the first place. So there are our solutions to this problem. Remember, quadratics can have no solution, they can have one solution, or they can have two solutions like this one. All right, so we've got another one here. I get x squared plus 19x plus 60 is equal to 0. So I slid the 6 to the end. Now I'm looking for two things that multiply to be 60 and add to be 19. This has more factors, so it might take you a couple seconds to do that. If your number sense is really good, you'll get it a little bit faster, but that would be 15 and 4. And so we slid the 6 to the end, so we are going to divide by 6. In this case, both of these reduce, so I'm going to do that first. This reduces by 3. 15 and 6 can both have 3 divided into that. Would leave me 5 over 2. And then this one here, 2 can go into both of those, so that would be 2/3. And so those are our two solutions, negative 5/2 and negative 2/3. We will continue to go because in some problems, they're just going to tell you to factor, and in some, they're going to tell you to solve. So my coefficient here would be 2x plus 5. And then here, my coefficient would be 3, so that's 3x plus 2. Now that we have those, we can set each of them equal to 0 to solve. And so I already know it's negative 5/2 and negative 2/3 because this is x minus my root, x minus my root. So they both had to be negative in order to turn those into positives. Here we subtract the 5 and then we divide by 2. Here we subtract 2 and divide by 3. And there are our two solutions. So this is solving by factoring. You start by factoring and then you set each one equal to 0. All right, our next one here, again, we're going to push that 6 to the end. And so we get x squared plus x minus 90 is equal to 0. We can go straight into our factors. So that's going to be x times x. And we're looking for what multiplies to be 90 and adds to be 1. And so that would be a positive 10 and a negative 9. 10 minus 9 gives us the 1. We knew one of them had to be negative because it's multiplying to be a negative number. The bigger number is going to be the positive. All right. Now we slid the 6 over, so we need to divide by 6. Again, this one reduces on both. I'm going to reduce this first one by 2. And so that's going to give me 5/3. I'm going to reduce the second one by 3, and so that's going to give me 3/2. My factors would then be 3x plus 5 and 2x minus 3. We set each one equal to 0. We're going to subtract the 5 to get it to the other side, and then divide by 3. And so we get x equals negative 5/3. On this one, I add the 3 and divide by 2. And so there is our two solutions. All right, go ahead and pause the video and try 4 to see if you can go ahead and factor that with a coefficient. Again, you can use any method you want. We are not going to check your method. We are just making sure you can factor. So go ahead and pause, work that one, and check your work. All right, check your work. Hopefully that's what you got. Factoring is one of the most important things we use in all of our future math classes, so make sure that you can do it. If you need some additional help, make sure you come in, but we've got to be able to factor. We'll be factoring with several functions this year. All right, for our next one here, one of the first steps you have to take with factoring is to actually factor out the GCF. It makes the problem much easier to use on a regular basis anyway. So before I start here, I can see that 2 divides into all of these. We didn't do that with any of the other ones because they didn't have a GCF, but this does. 2 goes into all of those, so my first step is to factor out a 2. Now, in this case, we're solving, so really we can divide by 2 to get it out of the entire equation. If you were factoring, you would just leave it on the outside like this. So right now I'm going to divide by 2. 0 divided by 2 is 0, so that doesn't change that side. So I would divide by 2 here. That cancels, and I divide by 2 there, and I still get 0. Now we're ready to factor. Now the a value is 1, so it actually makes it really easy to factor. That's x times x. Looking for what multiplies to be 5, adds to be negative 6. And so that would be negative 5 and negative 1. And so my two solutions are 5 and 1. So by taking out that greatest common factor, I didn't have to use a method because it went straight to that a equals 1. All right. Same thing on this next one. I would factor out a negative 3. And so right here, negative 3 times x squared gives me that negative 3x squared. Negative 3 times negative 12x gives me that positive 36x. And negative 3 times 27 gives me that negative 81. So again, I'm going to divide by negative 3 just to get rid of it, since all we're doing is solving on these problems. If you're factoring, you could leave it out there, or you want to leave it out there. But if you are solving, you can just go ahead and divide by negative 3. Another one that caused it to be at an a value of 1, so we're ready to go straight into our factoring, x times x. And we're looking for what multiplies to be 27 and adds to be negative 12. And so that is negative 9 and negative 3. Negative times a negative gives me a positive 27. And when you add them together, that would give you that negative 12x. And so my solutions are 9 and 3, because that's what makes the parentheses 0. And 0 times anything is 0. All right, on the back here, we're going to give you a special product rule. This is called the difference of two squares. There's a couple rules with factoring that you want to know. This is probably the most crucial one. This turns out a lot, so you want to make sure you know this pattern. It makes your factoring a whole lot faster. So we say here a squared, so a perfect square minus a perfect square is always going to be factored to the first number plus the second number, the first number minus the second number. And so then once you recognize that you have two perfect squares and they're being subtracted, it's going to go straight to that. If it was a plus here, it does not factor. So just because you see the two perfect squares, you can't go into that. Do realize that if that is a plus, it does not factor. It must be a minus. So let's look at what that looks like here. This is what you would have to recognize. X squared minus 81 equals 0. You have to recognize x is a perfect square because that's x squared. That one's easier to recognize. The second one is 81. Well, that's the same thing as 9 squared. So we have two perfect squares and they're being subtracted. So it factors to be the first term plus the second term, the first term minus the second term. And it doesn't really matter which order you put. You can put x minus 9, x plus 9 because it's multiplication. All right, so our two solutions are x equals -9 and +9. All right, this one's a little bit harder to recognize, but it's still two perfect squares. So the first perfect square is 3x. That is 3x being squared. And then 4 being squared. Because 3x squared is 9x squared and 4 squared is 16. And so now we're going to put 3x plus 4 and 3x minus 4. And so we subtract the 4, divide by 3, and so that's -4/3, and add the 4 and divide by 3, and that is +4/3. So we've got our two solutions right there. Again, go ahead and pause the video and try a couple of these, see if you can do them. We want to make sure that you're able to do them on your own. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, and then I'll put the answers up there for you. Here you go. Here are the answers. So check your work. We gave you a couple different ones to try there. So the first one was an a equals 1. So that's our easier factoring. The second and third one were our special products. Those were perfect squares. So you could go into the factors. The third one, this third one here had a greatest common factor of 3. So you wanted to factor that out first. And then your last two were the ones that you wanted to use one of your methods with. So there is solving quadratics by factoring.